Welcome back to the pharmaphorum podcast. In this episode, I spoke with PharmaLex's Dr. Christian Schneider, VP and Chief Medical Officer of Clinical Development Services, together with Dr. Christelle Boileau, Director of Regulatory Development Strategy and IPD Solution Lead at PharmaLex, which is part of Cencora. Our conversation goes into depth on navigation of the complex R&D processes there are now, with new biopharmaceutical breakthroughs such as ATMPs requiring different regulatory considerations. Touching upon last month's joint clinical assessment, our discussion explores different stages and phases, providing a general overview with commentary to fill in some needed specificities also, in terms of market access and getting these therapies into the hands of patients. Tune in, send in your comments if you have any, and, as ever, thank you for listening. Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I am joined by PharmaLex's Dr. Christian Schneider, VP and Chief Medical Officer of Clinical Development Services, together with Dr. Christelle Boileau, Director of Regulatory Development Strategy and IPD Solution Lead at PharmaLex, which is part of Cencora. Welcome both.
Thank you, Nicole. Happy to be here.
The same. Thank you.
So today we are going to be discussing navigating complex R&D processes to unleash the next wave of biopharma breakthroughs. To begin with, though, perhaps you both could introduce yourselves for listeners, share the passions that drove you on this scientific path to doing what you do today at PharmaLex.
Well, thanks, Nicole, for having us today. So indeed, what has been driving me all through is how you can apply science. When I was a young research fellow after medical school, I wanted to become a lab researcher, but I always found that there must be a different way to apply science outside of academia as well. And then I started my career in the German regulatory agency, the Paul-Ehrlich Institute at the time, as a young clinical reviewer. And that was almost like a dream come true because I could apply the practical knowledge from the lab and I could apply my medical knowledge. And this enabled me to see new medicines, cutting edge medicines, biotech products in that case. And then I worked in various regulatory agencies as the medical head of the licensing division of the Danish Medicines Agency, and as the chief medical officer in my last role at the MHRA, the British agency. And then I thought it is maybe time to apply this knowledge, not only from the regulatory side, but also helping industry more. As a regulator, you're always a regulator once you have the regulator's hat on, but you can only help so much within the restrictions that you have as a regulator. But as a consultant, you can go much deeper into data together with clients and help them with the knowledge that you have. And that was really fascinating for me and still is until the day today.
Thank you, Christian. And Christelle, do you want to share your journey to today?
Sure. So I have almost the same drivers as Christian, but instead of going to med school and being an MD, I decided to go on the lab side. And so I am a scientist by training, basically a pharmacologist. I have a PhD in pharmacology that I completed in France, and I moved to Canada, where I've done my postdoc studies. And for the past 25 years, I've been working between Canada and Europe in drug development, from fundamental research through to non-clinical development and clinical trials. I've been involved in many different therapeutic areas and different type of products, so a wide variety of projects. So I am also a program manager, so I provide the oversight on the development journey and working on a daily basis to create tailor-made solution to optimize development path and close the gaps. So I've always been driven by science, research and innovation, and by the positive change that we can make for patients through contributing to the development of new therapies.
Thank you both. So as listeners will probably agree, two different hats and yet so very much interconnected. So if we go back to our overarching theme of navigation of complex R&D processes, let's kick off the discussion properly with discussion of the preclinical phase. So what are the important considerations there, such as initiating chemistry, manufacturing and controls, or CMC activities, and establishing a target product profile? Who wants to take that first?
I'm going to take it. It's indeed a great question. There are indeed important considerations to have during, as soon as during the preclinical phase of development. But maybe before we dive into specific aspects of early development, we can briefly talk about the overall development process itself. As we all know, drug development from discovery right through the application for regulatory approval, EU marketing authorization, US NDA or BLA, is a risky, costly, and lengthy process. Less than 4% of early development IDs will reach first regulatory approval and market launch. So the development requires an integrated approach, and it is paramount to have an holistic view of the interplay across the multiple functions which contribute to a successful outcome. And these functions include, for sure, regulatory, non-clinical and clinical, but also data science and statistics, CMC, as you mentioned, chemistry, manufacturing and controls, also quality, pharmacovigilance, and market access. So while drug development aims to provide proof of safety and efficacy, development goals are not limited only to these objectives. So it is key to know the destination of the development journey, and this is ultimately captured in a target product profile, the TPP. The TPP defines a clear target indication or indications and corresponding target patient populations. The TPP is agreed early across the different functions with a focus on clinical and market access criteria. This ensures that the development plan is correctly structured to generate meaningful and focused data in order to support the intended use and commercial viability of the product. Now, back to early development. The early development plan should be defined and will help to guide the journey throughout the development. It is a living document that will evolve as the product progresses along the development path. There are key inflection points defined to include important development and regulatory milestones that are defined as part of the plan. There are also highlights time points where regulatory agency interactions may be beneficial, and we encourage to engage early with agency to make sure that the development is also aligned with the agency expectations. I would like to add two important considerations. Firstly, one should not consider development as a linear process. As I said, it implies different functions and it can be optimized if we consider all of them. And secondly, a successful development considers all the aspects, including the quality, the CMC, PV, market access, as well as non-clinical, clinical, and regulatory requirements, and from a very early stage. Having said that, an integrated approach guided by the TPP involving all the functions should help to optimize the risk of avoidable pitfalls along this journey and to increase the likelihood of a commercial success.
Thank you, Christelle.
I hope I have addressed your question.
I think you very much did, and thank you for taking us back to the overall development process itself and starting with authorization considerations. And as you say, the risk and the cost and the length therein. Christian, did you want to add anything to our discussion at this preclinical phase?
Thanks. I think one of the central aspects indeed is the correct translation of findings. So first, for example, if it is an advanced therapy medicine product that is gene therapy or cell therapy, that a relevant species is employed. That means that one where the medicine is pharmacologically active, and that might be different for the proof of concept, so that it works, and for the toxicology, that it works safely. And these studies can be smartly planned, but it's important that the right conclusions are made for the clinical development.
Thank you. I mean, did you want to go into further specifics on the unique considerations for ATMP developers?
Yeah, so basically we have seen cases where a relevant species was difficult to find. Maybe sometimes easier for the proof of concept. That means that a gene correction, for example, works, but not so much the toxicology, because the toxicology readouts may be different in animals than in humans. And that then requires a risk-based approach for the first-in-human clinical study, which I'm sure we will be talking more about for the clinical part of this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's segue to that then. If we think of the clinical development strategy that's necessary, what are the critical components there, and when should such strategy be established? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I can take that. I mentioned the translation. That is very important for the right starting dose. Very often we see, especially with biotechnology-derived medicines, that the starting dose is not well defined. We cannot be sure if maybe a higher dose would be more efficacious, yet as safe, or if a lower dose would be as efficacious, but safer. And we've seen some also traditional examples where the same substance in different clinical indications had completely different doses, and there was not a real rationale for that. I think companies are getting better and better with this, but I think this is sometimes overlooked a little bit, and that is an important aspect, which I think has to be translated well from the non-clinical data for the first-in-human clinical trial design. And I think that you asked for the critical components and also for the strategy. A strategy should be as early as possible, almost needless to say. And I think the target product profile is a central part of this. It is almost like the strategy that one has. So what patients are we developing this for? What's the placement of the therapy and all the other items around it? And that should be defined as good as possible from early on, so that the whole development is tailored towards it, so that the totality of evidence also is supporting it. And then when it comes to the first-in-human clinical trial design, obviously that's for safety and tolerability, but that could also have and should also have some activity readouts. So does it actually work? That could be pharmacodynamic markers, so activity markers. Sometimes efficacy, real benefit for the patient can, of course, not be established at that early stage. It depends very much on what medicine it is and what indication it is. And then when it comes to having defined the dose that is safe and tolerable, then it goes into the phase 2. And that can also be designed in a smart way. In the classical paradigm, the phase 2 trial would measure activity, and the phase 3 pivotal study then would measure benefit for the patient. So something can be very active, but not provide any benefit. So the classical, maybe a bit exaggerated example is something that makes a tumor stop from growing, that if the response rate is very high, then the endpoint is met. But if all patients die after 2 weeks of adverse events, then of course there's no benefit at all, but the activity endpoint was still met. So this is why the benefit is often split out into phase 3, but we see very often that companies, and rightly so, I think, also measure the benefit for the patient already in phase 2. And that requires also to compare it against the right thing. So the right comparator, that can be different for the EU and for the US. It depends on the standard of care. The critical component is also to know the field very well. What is the standard of care in the particular jurisdiction that you want to file your medicine? Who are the key opinion leaders? What is in the pipeline from other companies? How well can the trial be controlled? And of course, now we have the convergence of risk benefit, that's the regulator's task, and cost benefit, that's the task of the payers. In Europe, for example, we have, as of this month, the joint clinical assessment between the main committee, the Committee for Medicinal Products and for Human Use, CHMP, at the European Medicines Agency, and health technology assessment bodies. We have, of course, no experience as yet, but that is actually a very good move forward. And companies need to think about this from early on already, so that, as Christelle also highlighted, that the market access, which is, of course, a fast step for an early developer, is not forgotten, and one doesn't get a bad wake-up call later.
Thank you, Christian. Christelle, did you want to add anything here?
No, I think everything is said. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you. Moving on from that, and again, thank you for that, Christian, inclusive of the, yes, extreme example, but very clear example. Let's think now about the steps that companies can take to, going back slightly on this loop of information we've been exploring today, the steps that companies can take to understand the market access landscape and develop an effective regulatory roadmap. So we've explored different phases and stages, but for listeners' sakes, what is a sort of clear guidance here?
And maybe provide a general overview, and Christian can further comment or complete. Market access is indeed one of the functions that should be part of the integrated approach we introduced earlier. Receiving approval from US or EU regulatory agency, namely FDA or EMA, does not mean that the product can be immediately placed on the market or that the product will be reimbursed. So there are several examples of great products that were developed, approved, but not reimbursed in the end. Omission of market access considerations from the initial plan is unfortunately a common pitfall in development, and it is important to talk to payers sooner rather than later and to have the right partners to engage with them. One piece of advice would be that during the early development, developers should address one easy question. Is this great idea druggable? Meaning, how can we develop it? What will it take to bring the product to the market? And how will we manage the regulatory scrutiny? And on top of that, they should also focus on the differentiation of the product and on the advantages that this new product will bring to the therapeutic landscape. So it is important to define a strategy. We have already discussed it, build a plan, and then implement it. The strategy should be aligned on the TPP. Christian insisted on the importance of the TPP already. Mm-hmm. The strategy should reflect an understanding of the market environment and take into account the market positioning. So once the proof of concept is made, Christian talked about the early phase, clinical phase of development. Once this proof of concept is made after phase 1 or 2, the market access strategy should also be considered for the design of the pivotal clinical studies. And as it was also already mentioned, we should consider market access consideration for the choice of comparator, for instance, having the strategy in mind for the data generation to address the needs of the payer, the planning of the real-life clinical setting, and defining the right endpoints for the pivotal trials. So keeping the payer's expectation in mind and initiating a meaningful dialogue with payers from early stage, avoid a situation where payers' input may come too late to influence the development path. So in conclusion, the regulatory roadmap should include market access along with the other function, and then we can consider we have an effective roadmap for the development of a product, even more for an innovative product.
Thank you, Christelle. Christian, what would you like to add to that?
Thanks. I think an important factor is also the unmet medical need. So obviously, it's almost needless to say, if something hits in an indication where there is almost nothing authorized, then of course the readiness of the payers might be higher to pay it, but that depends very much on the magnitude of effect. And that you can, of course, not preempt so much in early development. You of course, hope that the medicine will be very efficacious, but that may or may not be the case. And it is also important to scrutinize as part of the target product profile already, if possible, if there is any other added benefit for the patient. Of course, the efficacy against the underlying disease is one aspect and maybe the most important one. But of course, safety is an important aspect. Is something maybe very much safer as anything on the market? Or is it much easier to take it? I'm thinking of an extreme example again. For example, if there's a medicine, the patient would have to get intravenous infusions every day, and a new medicine comes on the market, same safety profile, same efficacy, but is at 1 pill a month. Mm-hmm. That's, of course, a big difference. Of course, that is a scenario that might never happen, but it illustrates a bit that there is also, apart from efficacy and apart from safety, other aspects. Of course, if they pay off in the eyes of a payer, that's a different question to my best knowledge, patient inclusion and the patient voice will gain more and more importance also with the HTA regulations. And that I think will be an aspect also to watch out for.
Absolutely. An interesting point there that you make, Christian. Okay, let's sort of come to the summing up of all this now. Last question. Given everything we've discussed today, last question on this podcast always is about the future vision, but I pose this question to both of you. What is the future vision? And specifically, what does that future horizon look like, given complex R&D coming in with further ATMP development, everything we've been discussing today, JCA at the end of the month, etc.? What are your opinions on the future?
Well, I could maybe start if you agree, Christelle.
Sure, go ahead, Christian.
I think an important aspect will be indeed to make the R&D process less complex or more affordable. And one magic word here, or magic words in this case, is platform technology. So the complex technology that has been used for one gene therapy medicine product, for example, could be reused for another one, which shares the same vector, the same route of administration, maybe then the same tox data when it comes to the vector system. So a lot could actually be done. And recently there was a conference at the European Medicines Agency to celebrate 15 years of the Committee for Advanced Therapies and the Advanced Therapies Regulation. And I think in the panel, the debate became pretty clear that also EMA is thinking a lot about this, how to, not if they should do it, but how to make it possible that platform technologies are used. And US FDA, of course, is also thinking about this, also publishing guidelines and so on. So I think that is an important aspect. That would be a future vision, that things can become much easier, and also that manufacturing could be more streamlined. This is an important aspect because it is so expensive. Patient access is not only by clinical trials, but also by affordability for the healthcare systems. That is what we had with the HTA bodies. If something is very efficacious but costs so much to produce that it is basically not competitive, then that's a problem. And I think one other aspect will be how the regulatory authorities are able to actually do some balanced assessment in future. We will see quite a bit of change, I could imagine, at that aforementioned conference, that there was a discussion on the pharma review in the European Union. So there will be streamlining of the regulatory processes, which in itself is a good idea. If a regulatory process is too complex, it is, of course, difficult to run. But the Committee for Advanced Therapies, CAT, has been a central player. And if the CAT would not continue in its current form, that has led some people to have concerns about how the regulatory landscape in Europe might change. And part of this process is also that the definition for gene therapy medicine product might change. That is all still in the making, to my best knowledge. But depending on which products are included or excluded from that definition, of course, whole product classes could have new requirements coming up. So a future vision would be that then there would be an adequate regulation of these, so that there will be a balanced and well-formulated set of requirements that will also foster developments like these.
Thank you, Christian. Christelle?
I think Christian summarized very well what could be the future vision. If I just may add one word, it's important to plan early, to consider all the aspects of development, but also to remain kind of agile and to adjust quickly, to stay tuned for all the regulatory updates and make sure to move in the right direction according to the changes in regulation that may happen. So bear in mind that it is a complex process, but it can also be maybe streamlined and hopefully enhance the chance of a success at the end.
Thank you, Christelle. We like one-word responses, so agility it is. And there you have it, listeners. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion today on navigating complex R&D processes to unleash the next wave of biopharma breakthroughs. Thank you both. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
And so that concludes another episode of the PharmaForum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The PharmaForum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for PharmaForum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at PharmaForum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.